My ex-girlfriend wanted me to raise the child she had with her lover, but it wasn't my problem. From a very young age, I always thought Jen would be the person I'd share the rest of my life with. We grew up together, knew each other since childhood, and in some way, she had become part of my identity. When we finally started dating officially, it felt like everything clicked, as if that deep bond of friendship had transformed into true love. 4 or 5 years we were together, going through the typical ups and downs of any couple, but also building memories that I thought were unbreakable. My trust in her was absolute, to the point where it never even crossed my mind that she could betray me. The hardest part to accept wasn't just the betrayal itself, but how everything happened. I had always been a pretty private guy on social media, someone who didn't pay much attention to random messages from strangers. But one day, I received an unexpected message from a woman I'll call Sam. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake, maybe a prank, or someone just trying to bother me. But what she revealed completely shattered my perception of my relationship. Sam spoke with this unsettling certainty. She insisted that Jen was cheating on me. I froze. I didn't know whether to laugh at how ridiculous it sounded or get angry just from the suggestion. I asked her for proof, expecting that maybe she had nothing more than rumors or gossip. To my shock, just minutes later, she sent me several screenshots showing explicit messages between Jen and a man named Kevin. These weren't just innocent conversations. They were far too intimate to be misunderstood, filled with words I had never heard from Jen and confessions that left me completely stunned. I kept scrolling, my hands trembling. They weren't only dirty messages. There were also plans, arrangements to meet, and a closeness that split me in two. And then, in the middle of all that, came a line that knocked the air out of me. Jen was saying she was pregnant. Still in disbelief, I kept going through the screenshots. They weren't just spicy messages. There were entire conversations about their plans together, secret meetings, and a level of intimacy that tore me apart inside. But what broke me the most was that one sentence from Jen, written to Kevin. She said she was pregnant. That cut through me like a knife. Jen and I had talked about starting a family before, but always with responsibility and care. We were careful, we made plans. But that message meant she wasn't just cheating on me. It meant she was probably carrying another man's child. The realization twisted my stomach. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was betrayal with consequences that would change everything. The rage that consumed me in that moment was indescribable. Years of love, years of trust, all crumbling in a matter of seconds. My chest pounded, my stomach churned, and my mind simply couldn't process how the woman I loved most in this world was dragging me into such a nightmare. And then Sam, almost as if she knew I needed more proof, sent me a video. Kevin, drunk, admitting that he had been sleeping with Jen without protection. That video was the final blow. It left no room for doubt. The betrayal was real, and it was staring me in the face. What also shocked me was how Sam had managed to get that information. She explained that one day, Kevin had left his phone unlocked near her, and she stumbled upon the messages and the video. She wasn't doing it out of malice toward me. She told me that she just couldn't stand to watch a man being deceived in such a cruel way. I sat there, listening to every detail she gave me, feeling both grateful and destroyed at the same time. Each word she spoke was another dagger, another piece of proof that my relationship with Jen wasn't what I thought it was. Sam also revealed how she had managed to track me down. She said she had seen a post Jen had made on social media where the two of us appeared together. That was how she found my profile and decided to reach out. I didn't know whether to feel lucky that Sam had contacted me at the right time, or curse the coincidence that exposed the worst nightmare of my life. The truth was, without her, I probably would have kept living in ignorance, planning a future and a family with Jen that never would have existed. After thanking Sam for her bravery, I saved every single screenshot and the video as evidence. Deep down, I knew Jen would deny everything when I confronted her. I couldn't allow myself to look like some paranoid boyfriend with no proof. I wanted to make sure I had everything in hand, every piece of evidence to shut down her lies. Meanwhile, my mind wouldn't stop racing. I replayed every recent moment with Jen in my head. Her excuses, her late nights, her distracted behavior. Suddenly, it all made sense. The signs had been there all along, but love had blinded me, and I hadn't wanted to see them. Now, the truth illuminated everything like a spotlight, and it was impossible to ignore. That same day, Jen was staying at her mom's house. I saw my chance, and I began packing up her belongings. I couldn't bear the idea of her coming home with her fake smile, pretending nothing had happened, hugging me while I carried the weight of the truth inside me. One by one, I folded her clothes, packed her accessories, and stuffed everything she owned into bags. Each piece of clothing was like tearing a piece of my soul, because I remembered the moments when she had worn them, moments that were now forever stained by lies. When Jen finally came home, she walked in with this radiant expression on her face. She seemed nervous, but also happy. She hugged me tightly and without hesitation told me the news. She was pregnant. I forced a smile and said we should celebrate. She didn't suspect a thing. Inside, though, my heart was burning with fury and disappointment. I'd already made up my mind. Instead of celebrating, I told Jen we should go out together, and I drove her straight to her mother's house. The entire ride, she was glowing, talking nonstop about her dreams for our future, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I stayed silent, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Every word she spoke was like salt in an open wound. Each illusion she described fueled by a lie. When we finally stopped in front of her mom's house, Jen looked at me in confusion. She asked why we were there, her smile fading into uncertainty. That was the moment I could no longer hold back. I told her to drop the act, that I knew exactly what she had done, and that I had all the proof. Her face went pale. In a split second, her expression shifted from confusion to raw fear, like a deer frozen in the headlights of a car. She stammered, denying everything, swearing that it was all lies, that someone was trying to ruin us. But I didn't flinch. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots, the explicit messages, the plans, the conversations with Kevin. Jen's defenses crumbled in seconds. Her denial turned into sobbing, her hands trembling, her voice breaking into a desperate cry. And then, through her tears, she admitted it. Yes, she had been cheating. Yes, it had been going on for a long time. The truth was pouring out of her, not because she wanted to come clean, but because she had been cornered by undeniable evidence. The hardest part came when I asked her how long it had been going on. Between sobs, she confessed it wasn't just some one-time mistake. She had been with Kevin for at least 2 years. 2 years, nearly half the time we were together. In other words, for almost half of our relationship, Jen had been living a double life. That revelation drained me completely. It felt like someone had ripped away my ability to trust ever again. When I asked her if they had used protection, she shook her head and admitted they hadn't. That's when it hit me like a brick to the chest. The pregnancy wasn't some accident from a single mistake. It was the direct result of an ongoing, reckless relationship. The reality left me in shock. I told her flat out that it was over, that there was nothing left between us. I said I didn't want to see her or hear her voice ever again. Jen's reaction was desperate. She clung to the car seat, crying uncontrollably, begging me not to throw everything away. She kept repeating that she was sorry, that it had been a mistake, that she loved me, and that she wanted another chance. And then, in a moment of pure desperation, she said something that froze my blood. She told me she was willing to get rid of the baby if that was what it took to win me back. Her words chill me to the bone. I never thought she could go to such a dark extreme, bargaining with a life as if it were some token she could trade for forgiveness. I looked her in the eyes and told her nothing she decided about that pregnancy would change the fact that she had destroyed my life. No matter what she said or did now, the betrayal was permanent. My trust was gone forever. Finally, I opened the trunk of the car, pulled out her bags, and placed them on the doorstep of her mother's house. Jen collapsed into sobs, pleading with me, but I refused to stay another second. I closed the trunk, got back in the car, and drove away without looking back. Each step I took away from her felt like ripping another piece of my heart out, but I knew there was no other way. After that confrontation at her mother's house, my entire world collapsed. I went back home feeling completely hollow, like a shell of the person I used to be. I sat down on the couch without turning on any lights, just staring into the void. Every corner of the house screamed her presence. Her perfume still lingered in the air, her toothbrush was still in the bathroom, and the coffee mug she had used that very morning was still sitting on the table. It was as if everything around me was mocking me, reminding me that my whole life had been built on a lie. The days that followed were pure torment. I could barely eat, and sleep was out of the question. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her crying in the car, heard her confession, relived the moment she admitted everything. At work, I couldn't focus. Every attempt at concentrating ended with a lump in my throat that left me paralyzed. My friends tried to cheer me up, but none of them could truly understand what it meant to find out that the person you trusted most had been betraying you for years. What hurt the most were the memories of all the times Jen and I had talked about having children together. She used to tell me that she dreamed of me being the father of her kids, that she wanted to build a stable family by my side. Now, knowing she was pregnant with Kevin's child, those words felt like a cruel slap in the face. It wasn't just physical betrayal. It was emotional, a dagger straight into the future we had planned. To cope, I started forcing myself into routines. I went running at night, blasting music in my headphones, or I'd take long walks with no destination just to clear my head. But no matter what I did, I always came back to the same conclusion. Jen had destroyed everything we had built, and there was no repairing the damage. I kept telling myself I had to be strong, that I deserved better, but the pain clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake off. Eventually, I turned to writing. I bought a journal and began pouring my emotions onto the pages. Every thought, every ounce of rage, every tear I held back during the day ended up written down at night. Strangely, it gave me a little relief. By putting my suffering into words, I felt like I was releasing some of the weight that was crushing me. It didn't fix the pain, but it gave me a small breath of air in the middle of the storm. Weeks slowly passed, and little by little I began to adjust to the reality of being without Jen. It wasn't easy. During the first months, every time I heard a phone buzz or a notification go off, my heart skipped a beat. I thought it might be her trying to contact me. And then one day, actually was, I received a message from Jen. My stomach dropped the moment I saw her name on the screen. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The words were pathetic in their simplicity. She said she missed me, that losing me had been the biggest mistake of her life, and that she still loved me. As soon as I read it, anger surged through me from head to toe. How dare she? How could she even think she had the right to ask for another chance after everything she had done? I didn't waste time sugarcoating it. I replied with a firm and direct no, followed by blocking her on every platform I had. For me, the door was closed. I refused to leave even the smallest crack for her to crawl back through. But fate seemed determined to test me. A few days later, Jen showed up at my house. I saw her through the doorbell camera. She looked destroyed. Her face was tired, her hair messy, her expression filled with a kind of despair I had never seen in her before. I didn't open the door. Instead, I pressed the microphone button on the camera and asked her what she wanted. Her voice was trembling when she confessed that Kevin had disappeared not long after the baby was born. She said she was alone, abandoned by her parents after they found out the truth, and now she didn't know how to raise a newborn without support. She begged me for help, pleaded for me to be there for her in her darkest moment. I clenched my jaw and answered as coldly as I could. That was her problem, not mine. I reminded her that she had chosen Kevin, that he was the father, and that she had to deal with the consequences of her decisions. The conversation ended with Jen crying uncontrollably right there in front of my door, while I refused to let her in. Watching her break down like that weighed heavily on my chest. Not because I wanted her back, but because the scene itself was heartbreaking. Still, I knew deep down that opening that door would have meant sentencing myself to a lifetime of resentment and misery. I had already chosen my path, and there was no turning back. But in the days that followed, what hit me the hardest wasn't Jen's desperation. It was the reaction of her friends. Suddenly, my social media began to fill with hateful messages. People who had once called themselves my acquaintances were now, insulting me nonstop. They labeled me a coward, not a real man, even heartless for refusing to step up and help Jen with her child. They tried to guilt-trip me, saying I owed her gratitude because she had been by my side during some tough moments in my childhood, and now it was supposedly my turn to repay the favor. According to them, it didn't matter that the baby wasn't mine. I should still do the right thing. The harassment became unbearable. Every time I picked up my phone, I was flooded with notifications, insults, accusations, and attempts to shame me. They called me cold, accused me of having no compassion, and tried to paint me as the villain who had abandoned a poor woman and her baby. None of them seemed to care about the truth, that the child wasn't mine, that the relationship was already over, and that the real responsibility belonged to Kevin, the man who had disappeared. What struck me as the most hypocritical part was that not a single one of them offered to actually help Jen. None of them opened their homes to her. None of them volunteered to step in for the baby. They were all perfectly comfortable pointing fingers at me, but when it came to stepping up themselves, they vanished. It was easier to make me the scapegoat than to accept that Kevin had run away and that Jen's choices had consequences. Every time I read those hateful messages, one particular memory from my childhood resurfaced like a wound being reopened. I was 8 years old, and my parents had thrown me a birthday party. They invited kids from school, neighbors, even family friends. But the day came, and no one showed up. I remember sitting in the living room in front of a cake that hadn't been touched, wearing a party hat, waiting for guests that never arrived. It was one of the loneliest days of my life. The only person who came was Jen. Back then, she was just a girl from a neighborhood, but she stayed with me the whole afternoon so I wouldn't feel alone. That memory became carved into me, and for years, I associated it with the idea that Jen was special, that she was someone I could always count on. Now, her friends used that very memory as ammunition. They threw it in my face, saying that because she had been there for me that day, I now owed her loyalty forever. That twisted logic infuriated me. Gratitude for a childhood kindness did not mean I had to raise another man's child or sacrifice my own future. There's a huge difference between appreciating what someone did for you in the past and carrying a responsibility that doesn't belong to you. But her friends refused to see it that way. They twisted the narrative, tried to guilt me into believing that rejecting Jen and her baby meant I was erasing that piece of her history. Deep down, though, I knew the truth. That moment from my childhood had been real, yes, but it didn't erase the fact that Jen had chosen to betray me for years. It didn't erase the fact that Kevin was the father of her child. And it certainly didn't erase the fact that raising that baby would have meant destroying my dignity, my peace, and my future. So I stood firm, even as the pressure around me grew heavier. My gratitude for Jen's presence in my childhood would never outweigh the damage she had done to me as an adult, and I refused to let anyone manipulate me into believing otherwise. The weeks that followed turned into a real test of my emotional endurance. Jen wouldn't stop trying to reach me. Even though I blocked her everywhere, she always found another way. Fake profiles, new phone numbers, random emails. Some messages were full of pleas and desperation, begging me to understand her situation. Others were laced with anger, calling me cold, cruel, and ungrateful. It was an exhausting cycle of manipulation, switching between victimhood and blame. But it didn't end there. Her friends joined in the harassment. Day after day, I received anonymous emails, hateful comments on my social media posts, and even fake accounts that followed me just to send insults. It was relentless. They wanted to break me down, to drag me back into her chaos. Even when I ignored them, their words left a sting. It was impossible not to feel the weight of their attacks. That's when I realized I couldn't just sit back and let it happen. I began documenting everything. I took screenshots of every threatening message, every insult, every fake profile. I saved audios, kept track of dates, and wrote notes about each interaction. If this escalated, I wanted to be prepared. I had learned a hard lesson. The initial betrayal wasn't the most dangerous part. It was the emotional warfare that came afterward. At the same time, I forced myself to rebuild some kind of routine. I started exercising more consistently, throwing myself into my work and spending time with the few friends who truly supported me. It wasn't easy. The pain still lingered like an open wound, but slowly I began regaining a sense of stability. My scars were still fresh, but at least I wasn't bleeding out anymore. Through it all, I reminded myself of one essential truth. I couldn't allow Jen to have power over me again. She had chosen her path, and I had every right to choose mine. No matter how loud the outside noise became, no matter how many people tried to guilt me, I knew deep down that walking away was the right choice. Everything seemed to be settling down when, one afternoon at work, my phone rang. The number was unknown, and for a moment I thought about ignoring it. But something inside me told me to pick it up. To my surprise, it wasn't Jen. It was a man who introduced himself as her lawyer. The sound of those words made my pulse race. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything that had happened, after all the lies and betrayal, now she had the audacity to come at me legally. The lawyer's tone was cold, almost robotic. He said Jen wanted to open a case to claim child support for her baby. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I told him it was absurd, that the child wasn't mine, and that she knew it. But he calmly insisted that we needed to discuss an agreement. That single word sent chills down my spine. It felt like I had been dragged into some twisted nightmare where reason no longer mattered. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. Even though I knew I was innocent, I also knew how the system sometimes worked. People lied, evidence got ignored, and things could get complicated quickly. I sat at my desk, replaying everything in my head, and realized that now all the proof I had, the screenshots, the explicit conversations, even the video of Kevin, was more important than ever. I decided I wouldn't wait around to see what she'd try next. That same evening, I reached out to a lawyer of my own. I explained everything from the very beginning. He listened carefully, nodding as I showed him each piece of evidence. When I was done, he looked me in the eye and said, "You have a solid case. Don't panic. Just stay calm. The truth is on your side." His words gave me some comfort, but he also warned me. Jen might try to twist the story to paint herself as the victim and me as the villain. He told me to be ready, because manipulative people often know how to weaponize emotions to their advantage. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. It was outrageous. After destroying my life, after betraying me for years and getting pregnant with another man's child, she still had the nerve to try to drag me down further. It was as if she saw me as her last lifeline, her emergency exit. But I was determined not to let her pull me back into the fire. The day of the meeting with Jen's lawyer finally arrived. I showed up early, carrying a folder packed with every piece of evidence I had collected. My heart was pounding, but I knew I couldn't let myself show fear. I walked into that room, determined to stand my ground. The atmosphere was heavy, tense. Jen wasn't there, only her lawyer, who sat across from me with this rehearsed expression of confidence, as if he was already certain he would win. He began speaking with a tone that was both professional and condescending, throwing around words like moral obligation and responsibility. He said Jen had suffered enough and that, regardless of biology, I should consider stepping up to help with the child. He brought up our history, our years together, the promises we had once made, even the memories from our childhood. He was trying to turn the story into some tragic romance where I was the cold-hearted man walking away from a woman in need. Every word he spoke was carefully crafted to make me feel guilty, to pressure me into giving in. But I stayed silent until he finished. Then, without hesitation, I placed my folder on the table and began laying out the evidence. One by one, I showed him the screenshots, the explicit messages between Jen and Kevin, the confessions, the plans they made behind my back. And finally, the video. Kevin drunk, admitting he had been with Jen without protection. The lawyer's expression shifted almost instantly. The confidence drained from his face, replaced by discomfort. He cleared his throat, shuffled his papers, and tried to keep up his composure, but the evidence spoke louder than his words. I explained calmly but firmly how I had discovered the betrayal, how Jen had been living a double life for years, and how the pregnancy was the direct result of her choices. I made it clear that I had no legal, moral, or emotional obligation to her or her child. And then I gave him a warning. If the harassment and manipulation continued, I would not hesitate to take legal action against both Jen and anyone aiding her in spreading lies about me. The room went silent. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. He finally muttered that he needed to speak with his client before moving forward. I could see it in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to come so prepared. When the lawyer returned to the room after a short break, his tone had completely changed. Gone was the arrogance, the rehearsed confidence. He no longer spoke like a man who had the upper hand. Instead, his voice was softer, almost conciliatory. He admitted that the evidence I had presented was compelling, and that continuing to push the case in court would likely be a waste of time. He suggested that instead of dragging things further, we consider a mediation process to put an end to all contact and harassment. He said his client, Jen, was willing to move forward and avoid creating more conflict. For the first time, I felt like the situation was shifting in my favor. I accepted the idea, but I set a firm condition. Any communication moving forward had to be exclusively through lawyers. No more late-night texts, no surprise visits at my door, no fake profiles spamming my social media. If she or her friend tried to contact me again, I would immediately press charges for harassment and defamation. A few days later, I received a formal letter from the law office. The letter stated that Jen would no longer attempt to contact me directly and that her friends had been advised to stop harassing me as well. It also mentioned that she had decided to move to another city to start over. At the bottom, there was even a written apology for the distress this entire ordeal had caused me. Reading those words felt surreal. For months, I had been suffocating under the weight of her betrayal, the harassment, the manipulation. And now, for the first time, it felt like I could finally breathe. The letter was like a key unlocking chains that had bound me for far too long. That evening, I stood by the window of my living room, watching the sunset. The sky burned in shades of orange and gold, brighter than I had noticed in a long time. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. It was as if the universe was handing me back control over my life. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept peacefully. No nightmares, no tossing and turning, no waking up in the middle of the night with my chest pounding. Just a deep, uninterrupted sleep that felt like medicine for my soul. When I woke up the next morning, it was as if my body had finally allowed itself to rest after months of being on edge. I realized then how much the constant stress had been eating away at me. The betrayal, the harassment, the fear of what she might try next. It had all kept me in a permanent state of tension. But with that letter in my hands, with the promise that she was moving away and leaving me alone, I finally felt a sense of closure. It wasn't total healing, not yet, but it was the beginning. The following weeks became a slow but steady process of rebuilding. I poured myself into my work, setting new goals and tackling projects I had neglected during the chaos. For the first time in months, I found myself smiling at small victories, like finishing a tough assignment or crossing something off my to-do list. It wasn't about distracting myself anymore. It was about rediscovering purpose. I also went back to my exercise routine. Running at night no longer felt like an escape, but like progress. Each step on the pavement was a reminder that I was moving forward, leaving behind the shadows of what Jen had done to me. The music blasting in my headphones wasn't to drown out my thoughts anymore. It became the soundtrack of a man reclaiming his life. Still, I knew the scars were there. Even on good days, I could feel them, silent reminders of what I had endured. But instead of weakening me, they started to feel like marks of survival. I began to see myself not as the man who had been broken, but as the man who had endured one of the darkest storms of his life and was still standing. As the months passed, I slowly began to open myself up to the world again. At first, it was just small steps, accepting invitations from friends I had been avoiding, saying yes to a casual night out, letting myself laugh without feeling guilty. It felt strange, almost foreign, to enjoy life again after everything I'd gone through. But little by little, the weight started to lift. One evening, a friend convinced me to go to a small get-together. I wasn't expecting much. I figured it would just be some drinks, casual conversation, and then heading home. But that night, I met Amelie. The first thing I noticed about her was her smile. It was warm, genuine, the kind that reaches the eyes and makes you feel seen. There was something different about her presence, something calming, like standing in the sunlight after months of storm clouds. At first, I thought it was nothing more than a nice conversation with a stranger. But the more we talked, the more I realized there was something deeper. She listened. Not the kind of listening where someone is just waiting for their turn to speak, but truly listening, absorbing every word. When I shared pieces of my past, I expected judgment or pity or awkward silence. But instead, she simply nodded with understanding and said, "You've been through hell, but you're still standing." That says a lot about you. Those words struck me harder than I expected. For months, I'd seen myself as damaged, broken, a man defined by betrayal. But in that moment, Amelie reframed it. She saw resilience, not ruin. Her perspective began to chip away at the narrative I had been carrying. We started spending more time together. There was no pressure, no pretense. With Amelie, everything felt easy, natural. A walk in the park, coffee on a rainy morning, conversations that stretched into the night. It all flowed without effort. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't haunted by suspicion or weighed down by hidden lies. I felt peace. As my connection with Amelie deepened, I began to feel something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Trust. At first, it terrified me. After what Jen had done, the idea of opening up to someone else felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. Every instinct told me to stay guarded, to protect myself at all costs. But Amelie made it hard to stay closed off. She never pressured me, never pushed for more than I was ready to share. Her patience was disarming. So, one evening, sitting across from her in a quiet cafe, I decided to take the leap. I told her everything about Jen, about the years of betrayal, about the pregnancy that shattered me, about the harassment and the legal nightmare. I laid it all out, piece by piece, expecting her to recoil, to see me as damaged goods. Instead, she reached across the table, placed her hand over mine, and said softly, "You've carried all of that alone for too long. I admire your strength." Her words broke something inside me. Not in a painful way, but in the way a locked door finally breaks open after years of being sealed shut. For the first time, I didn't feel like a man defined by what had been done to him. I felt like someone worthy of compassion, someone who could be loved without conditions. Amelie didn't see me as broken. She saw me as human. And that validation was more healing than anything else I had tried. From then on, I noticed how differently I carry myself around her. My guard began to drop little by little. I didn't overthink every word, didn't analyze every gesture, didn't live with the constant suspicion that I had with Jen. With Amelie, things flowed naturally. I could laugh freely, share memories, and even dream out loud about the future without feeling like a fool. It was in those simple, everyday moments, her listening without judgment, her encouraging me when I doubted myself, that I realized she wasn't just another person in my life. She was the beginning of something new, something real. With every passing day, Amelie showed me what real love was supposed to feel like. It wasn't about constant sacrifice from one side or manipulation disguised as affection. It wasn't walking on eggshells, second-guessing every word, or drowning in suspicion. With her, love was calm, steady, and honest. It was built on respect and communication. Things that, looking back, I realized had been missing with Jen all along. She had this way of reminding me that love shouldn't hurt like that. She'd say things like, being with someone shouldn't feel like you're at war with yourself. It should feel like you're finally at peace. Those words hit me deeply. For years, I had normalized the chaos, thinking it was just part of being in a relationship. But Amelie's presence taught me otherwise. Slowly, the wounds from my past began to close. Yes, the scars were still there, but they stopped bleeding. They became reminders of what I had survived rather than chains that held me down. For the first time in a long time, I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't see a man broken by betrayal. I saw someone who had endured, who had learned, who had come out stronger. Amelie never tried to erase my past or pretend it hadn't happened. Instead, She encouraged me to face it, to learn from it, and to use it as fuel for becoming the man I wanted to be. When I would drift back into bitterness or self-blame, she would gently remind me, what she did says more about her than it does about you. Don't let her mistakes define your future. And so little by little, I let go of the anger. Not because Jen deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. I realized that clinging to hatred only tied me to her longer, and that was the last thing I wanted. With Amelie, I wasn't just healing. I was building a new foundation, one rooted in trust, dignity, and the possibility of happiness without fear. As time went on, I found myself doing something I hadn't dared to do in years. I began to dream about the future again. Not in vague, half-hearted ways, but with real hope. With Amelie by my side, the idea of building a family no longer terrified me. It didn't feel like a trap or a broken promise waiting to happen. It felt possible. It felt right. I started to picture things. What would it be like to wake up next to her every morning, to share a home filled with laughter instead of suspicion, to raise children in an environment where love was genuine and consistent. These weren't fantasies born out of desperation like before. They were visions rooted in a newfound confidence, a belief that I finally had the right foundation. When I look back on Jen, I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt a distant sadness, almost like remembering a stranger who had once meant everything. She had become nothing more than a painful lesson etched into my past. A reminder of what happens when you ignore red flags, when you let love blind you to the truth. Amelie, on the other hand, represented the complete opposite. With her, I discovered that love didn't have to be chaos. It didn't have to be begging for attention or constantly fearing betrayal. It could be steady, nurturing, and free of games. With her, I was able to breathe. With her, I felt safe. The biggest realization came one night as we walked together under the city lights. She held my hand, looked at me, and said, "You know, you're not defined by what happened to you. You're defined by how you rose above it." Those words stayed with me. They weren't just comforting, they were transformative. For the first time, I felt proud of myself. Proud that I had survived, proud that I hadn't let betrayal destroy me, proud that I was still capable of loving and being loved. With time, I stopped seeing myself as the man who was betrayed. That label no longer fit me. Instead, I began to see myself as someone who had been tested, someone who had walked through fire and come out on the other side stronger, wiser, and freer. The scars of my past were still there, yes, but they no longer defined me. They had simply become reminders of what I would never allow again. I also found a new sense of compassion for myself. For months, I had carried this quiet guilt, whispering that maybe I wasn't enough, that maybe something about me had driven Jen to cheat. But with Amelie's patience and my own growth, I finally understood the truth. Betrayal says nothing about the worth of the person betrayed. It only exposes the emptiness of the betrayer. That realization lifted a weight I didn't even know I was still carrying. Amelie and I began building something solid together. We talked about moving in, about creating a home where honesty and respect weren't optional, but foundational. Every day with her felt like proof that life gives second chances if you're brave enough to take them. She didn't erase my past. She helped me see it differently. And in doing so, she helped me embrace my future without fear. When I thought of Jen, it wasn't with anger anymore. It was with the cold clarity of hindsight. She had been a painful chapter, yes, but also a necessary one. Through her betrayal, I learned never to settle for less than I deserve. I learned that real love isn't about desperation or sacrifice. It's about freedom, dignity, and choice. Today, with Amelie by my side, I know I've found that. My nights are no longer haunted by lies, but filled with dreams of what's to come. My days aren't weighed down by manipulation, but lifted by laughter and shared goals. And as I look ahead, I finally understand something I wish I had known long ago. Love is not supposed to chain you down. It's supposed to set you free. Remember, if you enjoy these stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss more tales full of emotion, reflection, and unexpected turns.